Well, for me to even have this microphone and be up here, it takes an incredible amount of courage for me because I feel like I'm going to throw up at any minute. And
You're sitting real close, don't do that.
I'll try not to.
Okay.
But courage is actually one of the words that I would use to describe my mom. And over the years, growing up, she went from being someone that, we're very much alike. She's super fiery and independent and drives me crazy and is incredibly courageous. So really, I don't have some far out there story. It's just that my mom has a lot of courage, and for me to be up here, I thought I'd tell a story about her. And one of the first things as an adult, reflecting on my childhood and what my mom has given me as an adult woman, is her independence and the ability to go forward, even if she didn't know what road it was going to look like or didn't have any support. And when I was young, not even 2, 3, she was married to this lawyer. She was a daughter of a senator in South Carolina, in Charleston, of all places, and part of the Garden Club and the Cotillion and this whole society. And my father, being the strapping lawyer, and his father, being the same way, had many affairs and started going out with women, and blatantly too, not even like trying to be discreet. And as it she became aware of it, and her friends kept telling her, just turn your head, that's just what you do. And she struggled. She's like, I married this man, I committed a life to him, and I love him, and I have daughters, and there's no way I am going to raise my 2 daughters thinking that this is okay behavior. And so my dad came home one day and she told him to leave. And her, including my grandparents, said, you can't do that. Well, how are you going to survive? How are you going to live? She lost all her friends in the Garden Club and the whatever supper club and society. And and my grandmother actually told me this story years ago before she passed, and she just had this fight. She's like, I will sleep on the street with my daughters before I let them think that that is an okay way to be treated. And as I've grown up and gone through my own trials and tribulations, I just think about my mom's independence and spirit at that time. And it was before, especially in her circle, before it was like kind of a fad to get divorced. She was the first one of her friends to say, no, this is not okay, and I'm going to do something different. And then the second story that I just remember, because I didn't have cognitive memory of that. It was more from being an adult and looking back, and her at my age, which I'm 32, had 2 small kids, going to work during the day, school at night, and really fighting against her whole culture just to stand up for what she knew was right. But as about 5 or 6, I had seizures when I was younger, and they started about when I was 2, and I would go into these seizures, and I would float above my body, and I would see this silver cord, and it was all expansive and light and beautiful, and I would see my mom, and this one day, it was Halloween, and she had this clown wig on because she was a teacher, and she was freaking out, my sister was freaking out, and it was like mayhem, but I was just floating, and I was just looking, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I came back into my body, and every time I came back into my body from seizures, it was very painful, and not because the seizure was actually painful, but going from such expanse to this confined form was painful. And she held me, and she said, you were loved. And I just remember every time I came back from a seizure, she just held me and said, you were loved. And we would go to doctors, and they were like, she has epilepsy, she has this, she has that, and this was 30 years ago, and they would just start giving me medications to try to figure out what parts of my brain to turn off so I wouldn't have seizures. And I remember, maybe I was 5 or 6, I don't quite remember, but I was standing in a room full of doctors, and I had already had these EKGs or EEGs or whatever, and my mom, there's this team of doctors telling her that they need to put me on this new medication, and it was going to shut down part of my brain, and that I wouldn't have seizures anymore, but this is what she needed to do for her kid. And she just stood up, and she was just like, you have no idea what that's going to do to her brain. And I remember sitting there, even as a little kid, going, oh shit, what the fuck is gonna happen? Like, and they stood up and they're like, no, she could have a seizure and you don't know if it's gonna turn off part of her brain and she could die. And like, it was just so dramatic. And I remember even being a kid going, they're a little bit dramatic. And she just stood up and she grabbed my hand. I had the glue stuff still in my hair and it was cold and I was just in my gown, and she just grabbed my hand and she was just like, she'll have the seizures. And she just walked me right out the door. And I just remember being a little kid and I had my gown. I don't even think I got my clothes. And we went to TCBY because I was very excited. It was a very unusual occasion. And she was just like, and she just told me, she was just like, if you don't feel like something's right, she's like, you get up and you walk out the door. And that was my first cognitive memory of like how courageous my mom was. And then over time, as getting older and growing up and going through my own divorce, my mom has just completely been a pillar of support and strength. And even when friends and therapists were like, you need to leave him. You need to leave him now. And I was just like, Mom, I'm not ready. And she just held me still and was like, you'll know when you're ready. And she just has always supported me in a way of following my own heart and truth and spirit. And even though half the time she doesn't agree with like half the shit I do or thinks is kind of weird and crazy and points out I might be going to hell, but that's okay. And, she has really taught me what courage is. And I haven't thrown up yet, so this is good, and I'm done. So, thank you.